This is a reading from the translation I did 25 years ago called Intervista con Melid, Demonio Impuro, which translated means interview with Melid, demon of impurity. Melid, let us change the subject. You know how Jesus chooses souls for the purpose of mysticism. These special souls are the battleships for the counterattack against the forces of hell. They are stigmatized. Footnote, this is not to mean in the worldly sense of the word, but in the spiritual sense. And crowned with thorns, but they benefit from heavenly visions. They suffer very much because their duty is to save many souls. Evil spirits know these privileged souls very well. Yes, this is true. We follow them night and day, just as we followed Padre Pio night and day. If the Christ does 100 units of good, we are permitted to do at least 90 units of diabolical work. Note, this is understandable as Jesus instructed us not to judge. Those who wish to judge the interventions of God with man are given a viable mode of denial through the agency of Satan in the world. We battle directly with all mystical souls and indirectly with their spiritual directors. I know that you have been the spiritual director for many such souls for the past several years. By now your duties have proven to you the frenzied resentment I feel for you. What do you want to know? Only some clarifications. I will not give you any information pertaining to mystical souls. I will only dwell on one whom I have directed for the past 35 years. You know who I'm talking about, that woman who is a martyr of the religious vocation. From her infancy, Jesus manifested himself to her and chose her for the special vocation of victim. Jesus inspired in her a strong desire to become a nun. She was received into 26 religious institutions, was vested in many types of habits, but each time was driven out mercilessly from the convents as a result of your malicious interventions. Remember, Melid, what happened at the convent in Torino, in the Institute of the Sisters of St. Anne? Right after she had been vested with her habit, while the whole community was asleep, you entered through closed doors, grabbed the young girl and put her on a motorcycle and drove her around the city for a couple of hours. All the inhabitants of the area were scandalized at seeing a young man, you, cavorting with a young nun dressed in her habit. Every night at approximately 11, you repeated the scene. The superioress was informed, but she did not want to believe what she was being told, until finally one day a number of people in the community were present. They were asked who in the convent was responsible for the scandalous behavior. Everyone exclaimed, "It's her! It's her!" The next morning a telegram was sent to the parents informing them that she had been thrown out. Remember again how she was accepted in another convent at Castelfidardo? Even there you intervened. One day, while they were officiating a solemnity, you presented yourself to the superioress in human form. Suddenly you tore the young nun's vestments off, and you left her in the court wearing only her underwear. All the nuns ran off horrified, and the young nun was soon sent home. You, Melid, were stubborn, but so am I in the arduous task of spiritual director. I found a cloistered convent and informed the future abbess of all your antics. She decided to admit the young girl to the convent. Even here the diabolic vexations continued, even more frequently and powerfully than before. I multiplied my visits to the convent, and the abbess told me everything you were up to. She proved to be very brave, even though you showed yourself to her. The young girl was acclimated to your constant abuse, but you were preparing a special one for her. She had been admitted officially to the convent, several days prior to which you had cut off a lock of her hair, which I am presently keeping as a reminder. This fact concerned the abbess, since during the ceremony of admittance to the convent, part of the ritual included the cutting of a lock of hair. They had to feign the cutting of her hair because you had already done it. What scope could you have possibly had for doing such a thing? One day the girl committed an act of vanity for her pretty hair, and so the Most High permitted me to cut it off as reparation for the act of vanity. Footnote 7. It may seem odd that God would permit such a seemingly small fault to be punished so immediately. However, Mystical souls are called to reach a high degree of perfection so as to obtain graces for those who are not interested in God, since they are bound by the consequences of sin. Moreover, the devil does not bother those that are already in his control. But you did not stop there. That night you brought her all around the city. Eventually this martyr for the religious vocation was thrown out of the convent. It was my duty to find another place for her, so I referred to an excellent parish priest. I told him of everything, and he took the pitiful case to heart. I also said to him, "If anything strange happens, phone me, and I will come at once. I know what to do." Not too long after, the priest phoned me and said, "Come here right away." Both of us were in the room where the girl normally slept. She was neatly dressed, but her face was bloodied. Her forehead was wounded. So were her chin and her cheeks. Her lips were burned, and her hands were tied very tightly at the wrists, so tightly that they had become black. It wasn't the first time this had happened, so I was not very surprised. I asked the young girl, who despite the apparent abuse was serene, "What happened?" "Last night I was kneeling next to the bed when the devil came and grabbed me as he usually does, and he brought me around. This morning at 5 o'clock he brought me back here, touched me, burnt my face, and then tied me up." "Reverend," I said to the pastor, "do not worry. This has happened to the girl many times before. She knows how to take care of herself. A week from now all the cuts and bruises will have healed, and her face will be restored to that of a young girl." The priest cut off the laces binding the girl at the wrists himself. At least they were only laces this time. Many other times she is tied with a small chain, which is very messy to break. If only you knew how many of these chains and laces I have stashed in my office. I then asked the young lady, "How do you untie yourself when you are alone?" "I pray to my guardian angel, and he touches the chain, and it falls off." "What do you do with all the laces and chains?" "I throw them out the window." Fortunately, I have kept a collection of these talismans. Now, Melid, I ask you, why do you treat this girl so? With her life of victim, she snatches many souls from me, and since I am powerless to oppose her, I torment her day and night. I know the Christ will win, but at least I can vent my rage. Melid, you have some powerful enemies, especially those who are intimately united with God and who do the apostolate. Unfortunately, you also have many friends. Often they are those who deny your existence. They don't believe that you exist, but they follow your suggestions. They don't deny the existence of hell, yet they live serenely in a state of sin, intent only on the satisfaction of all their passions. You have yet another category of collaborators, those who develop relationships with you by invoking your presence during mediumnic interventions. You crave the calls of those who conduct seances. They think that they are invoking the souls of the dead, but little do they know that it is you who answers them instead. It is to your advantage to disguise yourself, since you intend to indoctrinate those present into believing in reincarnation, or that the dead they have successfully called are wandering extraterrestrials waiting to enter heaven. Translator's note. Often the notion of hell is utterly denied, as is the teaching on the consequences of sin. The Raelians, for example, a sect of sexually fixated people, is of the opinion that the Jews are descended from a race of extraterrestrials. Their strange practices and beliefs would seem to be an offshoot of this diabolical doctrine. You know that the acceptance of the doctrine of reincarnation means rejection of the notion of hell. Remember, Melid, when I ordered you in the name of God to admit to me that the idea of reincarnation was false? You answered, "If you know it is false, why do you ask?" Sometimes people believe me even when I tell lies. Regarding seances, answer me this. The medium calls on someone who has died, and so the people who are present believe that the answers they are receiving come from the person they have invoked. Often, you, Melid, behave very sedately as you instruct those who are present with your lies, whereas at other times you behave very irately. Why? More than once I have been approached by people who have had first-hand experience of these unnerving phenomena. Recently, a young man came to see me. He was astonished by what had happened to him. He said to me, "I had gone to Vicenza to stay with a group of friends. We called on the soul of so-and-so, and suddenly the medium began to feel sick and foam at the mouth. All the paintings and other objects on the wall began to rattle. A desk that was close to the youth's levitated more than a meter from the ground, and then stuck to the wall of its own accord, completely unsupported. Then it fell to the floor. My friends and I all ran out very scared. There were 14 of us, and all of us had come by motorcycle. Not one bike worked. All of them were seized. I never want to find myself in similar circumstances. What a scare. In the other seances I had been to, nothing like this had ever happened. Tell me why this happened, Melid. You could well understand the motive. Whoever participates in these things is obviously far from the sacramental life, or is manifestly impure. However, these same individuals often wear sacred objects of the Christ, or of that woman, my enemy, so I make them pay for their invocation by giving them terrifying experiences. Our interview is not over yet, Melid, until you answer me some interesting questions. Answer me. Are all demons of the same strength? No. The Christ taught you when he told the apostles incapable of casting out a particular demon. This kind can only be cast out with prayer and fasting. Demons of impurity are the most powerful ones. I am one of the chieftains of this very category. Man and woman have free will, and as such we are able to reject your every suggestion and assault if we wish it. In theory, what you say is true, but in practice it is not. We are very intelligent, and moreover we know the inclinations and tendencies of humans. We know how to approach each creature with a particular strategy catered to its caprice. By way of our impure temptations we succeed in darkening the intellect and plying the will, just as with fire you can even bend steel. The most efficient tactic is to snare man and woman with the heart. When we catch someone by the heart, 90% of the time we sing victory. I think that you demons are organized like an army, with many soldiers, each one specialized in a different way, with some fighting in the air, some on land, and some at sea. Therefore amongst the rebel angels there must be some who tempt people to blasphemy, taking God's name in vain, some to hatred, others to theft, atheism, etc. Although I think that certain kinds of sin bother the conscience, so that people do not fall into them often because they grow to detest them, whereas the sin of impurity is one that after a few falls is not so easily abhorred, and rarely inspires corrective action. Melid, I have often asked you during exorcisms, which sin sends the most number of souls to hell? You answered, I don't have to tell you, you already know. I think it is the sin of impurity. I told you that you know. All those who are now in the infernal pit are there because of impurity. They have committed other sins too, but were damned as a result of impurity or even because of it. Footnote 9. As a result, example, divorce, adultery, jealousy are all sins that can be traced back to impurity as their prime causer. Impurity itself would be to desire to commit impure acts. What do you think of those who live immoral lives? Footnote 10. That is, living together outside of the bond of matrimony. I think they are already registered in the book of the damned, and that only a great grace from the Christ would suffice to erase their name from it. Is it fair to conclude that those who are divorced are registered as your slaves? The Most High cannot tolerate the presence of the least stain of sin. Those who live in a habitual state of impurity will not be accepted into the kingdom of the blessed. It was me and my friends who succeeded in convincing the heads of state to promulgate a law that allows divorce. This we accomplished by leading them to understand that it is a necessity for the progress of society. The first ones who will have to pay for this law which you denounce, but that I treasure as the prize of my reign, priest wretch, will be the ones who legislated it. They will be responsible for the sins of impurity committed by those who are divorced. Secondarily, those who have accepted the evil law will also have to pay. How unhappy are divorced people who will have to suffer the torments that you now suffer for the transient pleasure of a lifetime. I, Melid, make them believe that the words of the Christ are contemptible, and I do not let their minds dwell on the fact that when one is dealing with the Most High, there is little to joke about. What will become of prostitutes? I keep them close to my heart, so that none of them will leave me. The strongest chain I have to bind their will is the love of pleasure and their love of money. The abyss is ample, and each of them has a place prepared for them. What do you like more, Melid? Private sins that have no repercussions on others, or the kind of sins that cause scandal and excite others to evil actions? Certainly, I prefer to those who bring on scandal. Scandal multiplies the effects of sin, and so my friends and I remain close to those who cause scandal, because they are our best helpers. Jesus Christ says, "He who follows me does not walk in darkness. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Woe to the world because of scandals, for it must needs be that scandals come. But nevertheless, woe to that man by whom scandal cometh. But he that shall scandalize one of these little ones that believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone should be hanged about his neck, and that he should be drowned in the depths of the sea." Matthew chapter 18, verses 6 to 9. I sometimes ask myself, how is it possible that despite the terrifying promises uttered by our divine Redeemer, the supreme judge of humanity, that great and scandalous sinners can live with such apparent peace of mind? Because I intervene to perform spiritual anesthesia. It is invisible, but real. In the same manner that a surgeon can cut into or even mutilate an anesthetized human body without the patient feeling any pain, so can I mutilate a human spirit. I do not allow the mind of the human to dwell on the responsibility that it owes to the Creator, and thus I can expunge the remorse attendant to sin. Everything becomes licit. I want you to be more specific. What system do you use for each category of immoral person? I cause disobedience to the orders of the Creator, who has given the body as an instrument of procreation. Footnote 12. Indeed, the word procreation implies that it is an act of cooperation, since of themselves humans are unable to create anything. It is God who creates the immortal soul of each human at the time of conception, and then joins it to its carnal shell. Practically speaking, the human body is like a soul cage. This is probably theologically incorrect, so I'm no theologian. That's just my opinion, and if I'm wrong, please correct me. By working in the minds of the impure, I persuade them that continence, never mind chastity, is impossible. Once I have established this delusion, I excite the passions by using the state of life, the sex, the age, and other circumstances that present themselves during a normal life. What do you mean by circumstances? The exaggerated and imprudent familiarity that men and women indulge in, combined with the normal flare-ups of passion that occur as a result. I think television provides one of the most effective means at your disposal in the furtherance of diabolical work. When used for good, television is a fount of good. When used for evil, it becomes a torrent of iniquity. During the night hours, there are many immoral and disconcerting scenes transmitted by means of television. I excite the curiosity of young and old people alike by satisfying their impure cravings. Then, when those who made these perfidious programs, those who own television sets, and those who watch the programs will stand before God, they will have to render account. In days of old, it was necessary to leave the home to become educated in immorality. But now, with television, the school of immorality is at home. What shall we say about bad movies? The majority of people satisfy their impure concupiscence, and you demons of impurity keep them all in your snares. Moreover, your quarry, or quarries, are not contented simply with looking, but are often moved to more than that. All of these, as you so well put it, are entangled in my nets, but they are so intoxicated by impure pleasure that they never see that they have been duped. They will understand when it is too late, when they are immersed in the blazing furnace. You, priest wretch, think that the only means I have at my disposal to populate hell are the media. Like a shepherd who relishes the sight of a lush field, so do I savor with great enchantment the sight of hordes of females catering to the demands of fashion, especially on the beaches. We demons of impurity await the summer season with great anticipation because of the great number of men and women that we can bind to our webs of impurity. Melid, Jesus has stated, "But I say to you, that whosoever shall look on a woman to lust after her hath already committed adultery with her in his heart." Matthew chapter 5, verse 28. Unhappy and blind women, know this, there is impurity of the body and of the imagination. Who can count the number of impure thoughts generated in the minds of dissolute men by your inveterate immodesty, in the streets, and especially on the beaches, where there are legions of demons? You act wantonly on the beaches as you bathe yourselves. Little do you know that you wound your souls and the souls of those who observe you maliciously. You want to avoid the summer heat by bathing in the sea, but you neglect to consider that you are preparing yourselves for an eternal fire. You laugh at the threats of hell, but those women who have preceded you there do not consider it so amusing. I am extremely intelligent, and to succeed in my undertakings I weaken the corrective action of parents towards their young daughters, first among those responsible for the propagation of lewd fashions. As pertains to immodest women, I lead them to believe that there is nothing wrong with wearing indecent clothes, since many women already dress like that anyway. For liberty on the beaches, I insinuate the desire to be gazed at and admired. Priest Wretch, I will tell you something you don't know. Some of the most beautiful women in the world are here in hell. They are here because during their lives they made use of their physical beauty to seduce men. Why don't these women reflect on the reality of their death and come to the conclusion that their bodies must become food for worms? It is I, Melid, who keep these considerations from their mind, which being meditated would be likely to separate them from me. I do the same with those who enjoy dancing, sleepovers, and even within the family environment. It is certainly true that your work with dance enthusiasts is never without fruits of impurity, since the lascivious music and movements required by modern dance are designed to awaken and excite concupiscence. These also are part of your diabolical reign. I am convinced that pornographic films, writings, and pictures are part of your venomous arsenal against souls. Certainly, books that arouse the passions and scandalous images are powerful tools at my disposal. They remove the desire to read pious literature and inoculate antipathy towards it, while I inflame the desire for impure things. Writers know this, and for the love of money, they fill the pages of their novels and manuscripts with seeds of impurity. These readings enkindle a strong desire for pleasure, and with it my praise increase all the time. Melid, tell me what tactic you use to change the spirit of the family life. Young men and women who start out good, obedient, studious, pious, and frequently communicating themselves, as soon as they enter puberty, many of them begin to leave the sacraments, abhor prayer, and begin to develop a loathing for all that has to do with religion. What, priest wretch, are you not able to comprehend the reason for the change? When one is in the infancy period, the passions are not normally felt, or they are very weak. As puberty commences, the normal desires attendant to nature are awakened. To come out victorious from this period of life, it is necessary to have recourse to the grace of God, which comes with prayer, vigilance, and plenty of goodwill. Not everyone latches onto these means, because I intervene to provide samplers of the drug of impure pleasure. Just like the addictive drugs that are now used in the world, a few tastes suffice to hook the user, and one would think that the desire to take it becomes so compelling that it becomes almost impossible to stop. It is the same, nay, it is worse with the drug of immorality. One falls and falls again, and becomes unable to exert enough strength of will to change. If other considerations are thrown in, footnote 13, presumably the evil spirit is referring to cases where the obsessed victim is driven to despair, anger, or revenge by being spurned by the object of his or her affections. It is possible to push the victim to medically incurable schizophrenia. Many, especially of the male gender, are pushed to madness that causes them to give up their work and studies because they are dominated by the mania of impurity. Mind you, schizophrenia is not always caused by the abuse of passions, but it is one of the principal causes. Naturally, whoever is ruled by passions will eventually turn against God, because God calls for a restraint of them. Footnote 14. It must be stressed here that the Church does not characterize pleasure as evil. It is evil to make pleasure one's primary end or one's idol. Within the sacrosanct bond of matrimony, it is lawful to receive pleasure from one's spouse, provided the behavior is potentially fecundative. It is thus disorderly and against the will of God to seek pleasure in a manner that is not open to the possibility of procreation. Melid, a while ago I asked you what you had to say about the male gender. You proudly answered, the young men of today are actively searching for sows. Footnote 15. Female pig in Italian. It is an expression denoting a woman of loose morals. And what of young women, exulting and full of joy? You answered, they are worse than the young men. The majority of youth is branded by impurity. What have you to say with regards to families? Matrimony is a sacrament, and a man and woman living together is a bringer of good, provided it is done according to the laws of God. I hinder the well-being of families in 1,001 ways. There are so many moral miseries before marriage, of which the parents are principally to blame. They leave their sons and daughters free to go about in cars or walking unattended, especially during the night hours. I choose this opportunity to lead them into temptation, that they may sin. They are concerned with their daughter having a white dress on her wedding day. I exploit the weakness and ignorance of parents who give their daughters the maximum of liberty, that they may leave the house and come back at any hour they please. The number of women who become mothers out of wedlock augments constantly, because I am fulfilling my job as tempter very well. During the married life, I do not stop working. I often convince parents not to accept the children that the Most High gives them. They kill them before birth. I stealthily introduce thoughts to diminish affections between spouses. I often succeed in urging a man to desire the woman of another man, or better yet, in getting a woman to desire the man of another woman. By means of the spirit of impurity, I can obtain legal separations and obtain the destruction of natural love of parents towards their children. What other tactics do you employ? I inspire the belief that legal separation is reason for dishonor, but later I convince that it is a necessary evil for the sake of progress. The human heart, after all, cannot be commanded, and one's liberties must not be violated. The fruits of my diabolical labor are great, because with the reign of impurity I drag souls where I want them to go. You want to bring them to hell. Certainly. Once they die, they will have my lot, there, where there is eternal sobbing, remorse, and gnashing of teeth. Now, Melid, I command you to answer one last question. I know well that you will not want to, but I command you. And who are you to command me, priest wretch? I am but a miserable creature, but as Christ and minister of God, by the authority inherent to my state as priest, I command you to answer me, and to answer me truthfully. Based on the answers you have given me so far, it would seem that the entire planet is under your exclusive control, due to the foments of impurity. But in the world which is beyond yours, there is the reign of God. Evil makes more noise than good, but there is still a lot of good in humanity. It is hard to count the number of souls who have consecrated themselves to the service of God, having made a vow of celibacy. How many men and women observe holy purity to the point where they would rather die than commit a sin? How many married souls there are that observe chastity? Chastity is not to be confused with sexlessness. It is desirable for a married couple to exercise due care in the control of their passions, so that they do not become an end. There are married souls that observe chastity within the married state. How much glory is given to God by these hosts of souls. Incidentally, while we are on the subject of good souls, victorious in temptation, what do you hate and fear the most about them? 2 things. First, prayer, and second, those who flee occasions of sin. Why do you fear prayers? It is the first step towards God. Persevering prayer attracts God's graces, which make it very difficult for me to overcome the person. All of those who are now in hell did not pray, or prayed badly, or prayed very little when they were living. I particularly hate prayers directed towards that woman. Footnote 17, the Virgin Mary. See, for example, Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Whose name we demons never utter. The second thing that I abhor is flight from near occasions to sin. My slaves of impurity not only do not flee occasions of sin, they hunt avidly for them. Melid, our interview is over.